Even if you don't know the details of this woman's story, I'm sure you've at least heard her name or the rhyme about her. Lizzie Borden took an axe. Except I'm not convinced she did. Generations have been obsessed with the crime she allegedly committed. Most of them believe she did the time, but never did the crime. And it's really great to listen to a bone-chilling story, am I right? We can't forget the prophet. Lizzie Borden was born in 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her dad, Andrew, was really good at investing, very rich because of it, and not worried about stepping on other people to get there. While most wealthy people lived on the hill, Andrew chose to keep his family in more modest digs. Lizzie resented his frugality, and at 32 years old, she was still living at home. A spinster, a derogatory term for women who hadn't gotten married, whether by choice or circumstance. How dare they disregard their uteruses like that? But before that, when Lizzie was single digits old, her dad brought home an expensive gift, a stepmom called Abby. Lizzie and her older sister Emma never did get along with Abby. Sources said the three were cool and cordial, but never affectionate. And I'm sure by this point you're familiar with at least the bullet points of the story. But briefly, because we got other shit to talk about, on the 4th of August, 1892, Lizzie, her stepmom, and the maid were at home. Abby was in the bedroom upstairs. The maid had snuck off for a nap. Well, Abby had tap danced on Lizzie's last nerve. So Lizzie attacked her from behind with a hatchet. Then she heard her dad come in from his business rounds, sit down in his favorite chair, and she attacked from behind again. She calmly gathered her things, burned the dress she was wearing, and got rid of the hatchet. Then she made it sound like she'd just come home, and Lizzie screamed. She just found her dad with his face destroyed. Lizzie sent the maid, Bridget, to get the doctor. Obviously, it was too late and it was definitely a crime. So the cops got called in. Then somebody asked where Abby was, and now the cops were double called. Lizzie was ultimately arrested and stood trial for. During the trial, a doctor allegedly testified that Abby had been struck 40 times and her father 41. Still, Lizzie was acquitted. The jury, 12 men because women weren't allowed, came to the not guilty verdict in less than an hour, and she collapsed in her chair, sobbing in relief. She inherited the equivalent of about $8 million today and bought a house on the hill, just like she'd always wanted. But people shunned her because of what she did and for flaunting all her blood money. She lived out her life a pariah. Yeah, but buying a house and spending an inheritance doesn't make her automatically guilty. In fact, I found several articles and a whole ass book by a legal scholar that indicate the story is incomplete at best, highly sensationalized. And that, kids, is why we're here. Let's revisit that day, but with some of the shit that gets left out, okay? Keep in mind, I'm not going to be able to include everything. So I encourage you to check my sources in the description of this video, then search for more. Stop automatically buying into the gruesome details just because it sends shivers down your spine. Okay, so at trial, a chemist testified that Lizzie had attempted to buy poison from him the day before the incident, but it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity because she'd never been there. Moving forward to the day, yeah, Lizzie found them and she did send Bridget for the doctor. And the cops came. And Abby and Andrew were taken out by a hatchet. At first, everybody thought that a guy had broken in. I mean, Lizzie was a churchgoer and a Sunday school teacher. Wealthy, even if her dad didn't let her spend it. Oh, and by the way, women aren't capable of cracking a skull. You gotta wonder how many women have gotten away with shit because of that shit. Anyway, all in all, the case against her was entirely circumstantial. The weapon was never found, but the prosecution brought in plaster casts of Andrew and Abby's faces, then demonstrated just how well a hatchet blade fit into the wounds by literally putting one of them into the plaster wounds. That's when Lizzie fainted in the middle of court. Worth mentioning here. No, they were not whacked 40 and 41 times. Abby suffered 18 to 19 blows, Andrew 11. Still lethal, and grisly enough without embellishment, for fuck's sake. Prosecutors thought they'd hit the jackpot when a dress was found with a spot of red on its hem. That turned out to be paint. Something to keep in mind. While it was by no means perfect, forensics, like fingerprinting, was becoming a thing. Apparently, nobody told the cops, 'cause for several days they roamed the crime scene, fucking up any potential evidence. Granted, Lizzie's fingerprints would have been all over everything, but if there was an attacker or attackers, well, that shit was gone. Initially, the women of the city rallied behind her. They defended her against reporters and others. They just knew she couldn't have done it. Except when the presiding judge said something to the effect of, yeah, it's circumstantial, but she's probably guilty. And the court of public opinion turned against her. It was reported that she never showed emotion during her pretrial. She was cold, stoic, and allegedly told conflicting stories depending on who asked. Yeah, but her doctor testified that she'd been so distraught, he'd prescribed morphine to help her sleep. Guess what morphine can do to your brain, kids? She wasn't lying. She was numb, quite literally. The case made national headlines, and in many cases, details were intentionally embellished or completely made the fuck up. See, kids, people have always been willing to make shit up to make some money. The inheritance. She and Emma, remember her, lived together in the house on the hill, which they called Maplecroft. Yeah, Lizzie was living the life she'd always dreamed. Trips to Boston and DC for the theater, lavish parties at home. Maybe she was trying to make new friends who wouldn't automatically condemn her. But local folks would not let her forget. They stopped sitting with her at church, wouldn't look at her, and she became more and more withdrawn, stuck to home. And her house became the one in the neighborhood that kids dared each other to approach. In 1905, Lizzie and Emma had a huge falling out, and Emma left. Reporters asked why. She said it was because the shit that went down there should never be spoken about in polite society, and Lizzie's lifestyle was unbearable. And now we come to the point that gave me the most pause. According to multiple sources, there was a rumor that Lizzie and Bridget were in a romantic relationship. Then there was this famous actress, Nance O'Neill. They met at one of Lizzie's parties, became fast, inseparable friends, until a few years later when they just stopped talking completely and never did again. Interesting, right? But why are you bringing that up, Mary? Well, the time period and same-sex couples. How dare you do such a thing? Emma didn't approve of the lifestyle and probably didn't want to be associated with it. Oh, right, I didn't mention this. It was clear that Lizzie and Nance had a thing for each other. And just to put my own fly in the ointment, if Lizzie and Bridget were having an affair when the incident happened and people found out, why not make her a scapegoat? What if she was framed because she was a lesbian, then suggested there was another attacker, or two, that were men? Like I said, Andrew made enemies, but nobody else was ever brought to trial. And it doesn't sound like people looked very hard. So yeah, a lot of the details seem to incriminate Lizzie, especially when you cherry pick. She had a decent motive, the money and her bitch of a stepmom. But the newspapers. I said they were making shit up, like claiming she did it while she was in the nude to avoid leaving behind evidence. Well, when reporters are coming from as far away as San Francisco, how you gonna make a buck on the truth? While someone else is raking it in by making it up. All in all, I know the case probably won't be solved. And I'm not a legal expert. I'm just really good at recognizing patterns, especially in the way that women and other marginalized communities have been treated throughout history. At the very least, I hope I've given you a reason to doubt her guilt. Because, if a story isn't spiced up, you ain't going to sell any tickets. Interestingly enough, Lizzie and Emma passed away within days of each other in 1927. Each was buried beside Andrew and Abby. Depending on the source, Lizzie left explicit instructions regarding her burial. No one was invited. Can you blame her? Fucking duh. So, was she a criminal? My gut is telling me that society happily accused her because they considered her among the worst of sinners. Okay, and there's one more thing that really bugs me about this story. Every year on the anniversary of the attacks, it's reenacted for the public. For a century, Lizzie has been eagerly condemned for a crime I'm no longer convinced that she committed. And let's not forget, regardless of who did it, there were two people that passed away that day. But hey, it's a fun night out, isn't it? And it's all in good fun. It's a ghost story. No, it's disrespectful at best. But respect? That doesn't sell tickets.